Well, hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors, and today we're excited to bring you part 2 in this 3-part webinar series on effective buyer consultations with Evan Fuchs. And if you missed part 1 or if you'd like to listen to it again, no worries. We have it recorded and available on our website at aaronline.com. And you can see it 24/7 at your convenience, along with about 25 other webinars that we've done in the last year or so. So as I said, today's webinar is presented by Evan Fuchs, who is a 20-year veteran here in real estate, and he has some of the best ideas. He's one of our GRI instructors. He serves local, state, and national levels, and he was even the 2014 Realtor of the Year. So we are thrilled that he graciously has agreed to do this 3-part series for us. Today it's all about the buyer, and we're going to be talking about goals for your buyer consultation, the DNA of the buyer, assessing their needs, desires, their abilities, and basically what to expect when you're expecting to buy. And we're going to talk about boundaries and how to be the best realtor for your client. So as I said, we're super excited that Evan is here to join us today, and I'm going to turn it over. So Evan, welcome.
Well, good afternoon.
Well, we are super glad you're here. I'm just going to turn the screen over because due to the wonderfulness of technology, Evan is, what, a few hundred miles away from me? How far are you, Evan?
About 250.
About 250, and you are in?
Bullhead City.
Bullhead City. So
that's right.
Evan, you are good to go.
Fantastic. Okay, very good. So as Kelly said, this is part 2 of a 3-part series. So thank you everybody who joined us the first time, and thank you for coming back. I just wanted to, we got a lot to do, so I want to do it quickly, but I did want to review just a little bit of what we covered last time. So part 1, which is available online, we talked about the risks and costs of working without a plan, being a Pop-Tart realtor, right? Talked about the difference between doing things on purpose and on accident, the fact that on-purpose agents have a plan that they work, they set up their business on purpose, and that they have systems for working with buyers. And if you remember, our mantra was CITO, come into the office. So we're using that word, that acronym CITO, to mean the proverbial office, which is where we start our relationship with potential buyers. Not at a vacant listing, not meeting some stranger in some private place, but we're starting with the buyer consultation. So we're using CITO to remember that. And then finally, what we talked about last time was our value proposition to the buyer's agent, as the buyer's agent, excuse me. So I was kind enough to give you a homework assignment last time. You're welcome. Let's check in and see how we did on the homework real quickly to bring everybody else up to speed who wasn't with us last time. One of my questions to you is, what are you doing on purpose? To look at your business as a buyer's agent, every step of your business, and kind of define what's happening on purpose and what is just happening to you. So number 1, what are you doing on purpose? Number 2, whose plan are you working? Do you have a plan? If you don't have a plan and you're working, you're still working somebody's plan, usually just not your own. So I ask that you looked at your business and figure out whose plan you were working. Also ask you what process what is your process for working with buyers. We know from experience and from research that buyers want help understanding the process. That just sets the table for us to have our own process that speaks to the buyers that we want to work with in a way that's valuable to them. In terms of value, what value do you bring to the table? Can you define it? Can you hone it? Can you articulate it? Does your buyer see it? What is your value that you're bringing to the buyer? And then I gave you 2 words of caution. Number 1, as you're working on this whole home buying process, that you keep in mind that you control the process. You can set that up. That's for us to control the process and leave the decisions in control of the clients. So we control the process, clients control the decisions. Finally, that we stop meeting strangers in private places. We're not going to harp on that. I just want to remind everybody that doesn't work in today's day and age. That's not safe, and it's not a good way to start our relationship. So that's where we were last week. hopefully, or excuse me, last month. Hopefully you got a chance to make some progress in those areas. And now we're going to move forward and talk about focusing on the buyer. Focusing on the buyer. So remember that the buyer's consultation is a system for growing your business. That's how I'd like for you to think of it. And specifically growing repeat and referral business. We do that by providing better service through this system called the buyer's consultation. And adding that time up front to do a buyer's consultation actually means less time overall. If we're willing to invest a little bit up front, that pays us back. So we're providing better service in less time. We have a chance to build value, build loyalty, do the qualifying piece, and keep us safe. Now, if you remember last time when we talked about CTO, our shorthand for starting the home buying process with a consultation in a public place, like your office, like a Starbucks, a restaurant, a park, somebody's conference room, a title company, anywhere that's a public place, we talked about having these two different tracks. Where we're thinking CTO, we're on that track. The potential buyer that we're talking to for the first time, they may be on a different track than us with different goals, and that we need to get on the same track. That starts with the buyer's consultation, but it continues through until we have an agreement to work together. So let's start today by looking at what are our goals as the buyer's agent. What are our goals for the buyer's consultation? Well, we want to start with the end in mind, as they say, by defining what success looks like. Where do we want to get? We want to use the time that we spend with the buyer up front to get to know them, right? Get to know them as a potential client, as a person, and see how we can help them or best help them if we decide to work together. In the process of doing that and building some rapport, we also build trust, and we have a chance to showcase what our value is as a buyer's agent. That's all built into this. Now, of course, qualifying and doing the wants, needs analysis is critical to this part in deciding if and how we can help somebody. So we call that DNA, desires, needs, and ability. And we're going to talk about that in more detail in just a bit, along with setting realistic expectations. We also want to get commitment, and along with that, loyalty. And then we want to make a plan for the home search. So this is kind of broad strokes overview of what we're looking for. So we're still doing that me thing. We're talking about us. That's our track. So what about the buyer? If you're a buyer's agent, then it's all about the buyer. What's in it for the buyer? What does the buyer see? And we call that buyer's eyes, looking through your service, looking through your transaction, looking through the process, all these things through the buyer's eyes. What do they see? And as soon as we can understand the buyers that we're working with and what they're seeing, the sooner we can start providing more valuable, more relevant service, better customer service that leads to better experiences, repeat referrals. So that's where we are with buyer's eyes. So this is a buyer consultation. What are their goals? Now, let me stop here for just a second before we go any further. Callie, do we have the poll that we can ask on who's using buyer consultations at this point?
Absolutely. So on your screen it says, are you currently conducting buyer consultations? Yes or no? I'll give it just a couple more seconds. All right, and the poll is now closed. And it looks like we have 68% of today's attendees are currently conducting buyer consultations. So 68% yes and 32% no.
Okay, 68%. Now I'm assuming that 68% is here to up their game a little bit, and the 32% are here because they either want to start or they're ready to be sold. So I spent a lot of time last time trying to make the case for buyer consultations. Mm-hmm. That would be a good starting point for people who aren't using them, but we're going to continue and still make the case for it as we go through the rest of today. So getting back to where buyer's eyes and what they're looking at, if you think about your buyer coming in and meeting with you for the first time, what's on their mind? They're probably thinking, what's in it for me? And as they should. What are their goals at this stage? Probably to tell us what they're looking for. We know that from survey results that buyers are looking the most important thing that they're looking for from an agent is help finding the right home. That's about half the responses. So even though there's all this self-serve Google Homes whatever kind of stuff out there, they're still looking to us for help finding the right home. Obviously, this is going to be on their mind, and that's one of the things that one of their goals is to describe for us what they're looking for. They want to know about the home buying process. They want to know about the market, and they cite that as one of the benefits that agents provide is understanding the process. We've talked about that. Also, time to answer questions, not just questions that buyers come in with, but questions that you uncover in these previous steps that we've talked about. So by having these conversations and using our ears to listen, we're going to get cues for other questions that we can answer and address. And then, of course, what's on their mind is let's go out and look for a house. So this is part of that converging their goals with our goals, and ultimately where we are by the end of the buyer's consultation is to say, do we want to work together? That's a common goal that we both have, both the buyer and the buyer's agent. And we need to recognize that we both get to decide. It's a mutual decision. Not every buyer wants to work with us, and not every buyer is somebody that we can help. And we need to understand that. We want to try to focus on the people that we can help. Sometimes people aren't ready. Sometimes it's future business. Maybe they're going to rent for a while. Maybe it's just somebody that you're not compatible with or can't help, and you can refer them somewhere else, but it needs to be a mutual decision at this stage. Are we going to work together? And that's the root of loyalty and some of these other headaches that we have down the line where deals fall apart or there's miscommunications, is we don't have a clear agreement that we're going to work together. Of course, that agreement can be reduced to writing with the buyer-broker agreement, which some of you have asked me about since last month, and we're going to talk about that in part 3, which I believe is on April 20th. So what I want to do now is share with you some tools that I use when I work with buyers that help keep me on track and get me to a place to accomplish many of those goals that we just walked through, both on our side and the buyer's side, including that decision to work together. So I mentioned earlier DNA, which stands for desires, needs, and ability. This is the qualifying and the wants, needs part of the consultation. This is where we find out what's the buyer looking for, how are they going to fund it, and we take in information and we interpret what they say to find their underlying needs so we can help them. So for example, people love to talk about bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, numbers that you can plug into search fields. Those are the what they're looking for. But underneath all those whats are the whys. People can Google their own whats, right? They can go to whatever and put in their own searches with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and that sort of thing. But when we get to underneath the why, what's behind those whats, then we go to work creating new options and help them find the right house. So, for example, can 3 bedrooms really mean 2 bedrooms in an office? Or 2 bedrooms in a casita or a guest house? Or if somebody says they want acreage, are they really just looking for privacy, which maybe we can accomplish on a smaller lot for less money and open up more areas for them to search in? So that's what I'm talking about when I say be what they can't Google, focus on the whys. So that takes conversation and it takes listening. And when that's a valuable service that we can provide is by helping our potential buyers at this stage clarify what they're looking for and open up more options for them. Of course, we can't do that unless we get information first. So what they call this in law and in medicine is intaking. When a professional meets with a client at the start of the relationship, they ask them questions and they listen to the answers to find out how they can help them. That's the same thing that we're doing, and we don't have to do it with a clipboard, right? It doesn't have to be an interrogation, that sort of thing. Our process might look more like this, where we're sitting down and having conversations, but we're listening and we're asking the right questions, and we're doing them, making those questions, asking those questions intentionally. So I recommend using an intake sheet to do that. So I might ask questions in advance on your phone or email, text, whatever it might be, and get some of my answers ahead of time, which is great because I can use those answers to help me get ready for this first meeting. What I have on the screen here is a sample buyer intake sheet, and I want to look at some of these questions with you, and we're sharing these, so in the handouts for this session you can download this. It's a sample, but what I want to do is walk through some of these questions and talk about where they come from. So if you look at this top question, do you currently own a home or rent? How long have you been there, and do you need to sell your current home in order to buy a new home? Now, this is loaded with good information. If I'm going to ask somebody if they own a house now, well, now I'm thinking, okay, do they need to sell before they buy this new house? Or are they going to buy a new house, get under contract, and have a contingency to sell the existing home? So that leads into discussions about negotiation. It leads into discussions about if it's a buyer or a seller's market. If I've got somebody who needs to sell their home first and they want to do a buyer contingency and it's a seller's market, they're not going to get the time of day. But if it's a buyer's market where there's not that many buyers out there and we've got longer marketing time, longer days on market, maybe prices are falling, well, they might get some attention. So if I know that in advance, I'm going to break out that buyer contingency addendum, and we're going to walk through that process of how a contingent sale works when we have this first meeting. I'm also thinking, is this a listing opportunity if they have an existing home, or is there a referral opportunity? So just by asking those basic questions about their current state, we get a lot of information. If they're renting, are they going to be a first-time home buyer? Did they used to own and maybe something happened in the downturn of the market? They've been renting for a while, now they're going to come back into the market. What's the underlying story there, and what can I do to help them with knowing that? How soon would you like to move? Well, that helps me prioritize who I'm going to work with when, knowing their timeline. The next couple of questions about financing, and we're going to talk about that in just a bit. In a couple more slides, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But what I want to look at here is these next couple of questions. Tell me about your current home and what do you like best? Now, you'll notice this is what we call an open-ended question, which is a question that can't be answered with a yes or no. And you want to fill your questioning with open-ended questions, because if we switch this and make it a closed question, like, do you like your current home? And the answer is yes. Well, now I have to think up a new question to ask because I got a one-word answer and we want to keep the conversation going. Whereas if you make it open, that's where you're going to get the good stuff. Tell me about your current home. What do you like about it? If there was something in your home now that you could pick up and move to a new home, what would that be? Questions like that get us to understand their tastes, their preferences, and lead to things like, well, why are you moving? And those kind of questions. And then be more explicit in asking, what are you looking for in your next home? What are 3 things you can't live without? Those types of questions to get an understanding beyond bedrooms and baths. What are they looking for? Now, these questions, do you have a price range in mind, and what is that price based on? We're looking to get some kind of take on their point of view of the market. Do they know what kind of market they're in, or is their price based on something their neighbor told them? Is their price based on proceeds from another sale? Is it based on the down payment they're going to use from their tax return? Is it based on something they saw online? So that helps us get ready to talk about the market, which we're going to do later in our consultation. And then I have some experience-related questions. How many homes have you purchased? When did you last make a purchase? So sometimes you might be dealing with somebody who has a lot of experience, but they haven't bought a home in a while. So real estate changes all the time. We're gauging that experience. And this last question of, are you familiar with how real estate works in Arizona? I love that question because sometimes you have people that are very experienced, but they might be from the East Coast. They might be from a formal closing state. Or they might be accustomed to having pre-possession or post-possession or things that aren't the norm for us. So we're respecting their experience while at the same time trying to identify where we can help fill in some of those gaps. So my recommendation in putting together an intake sheet is to make sure that you use open-ended questions, that you make your own questions in your own words, and then you try them out, and then you revise them. Sometimes you can come up with the best, smartest question and put it on paper, and then as those words are coming out of your mouth, they just fall and they're no good. So you get to ask a different question the next time. But make sure that you have reasons behind these questions, which are to get to providing the best service that we can to buyers if we choose to work together. All right, so this is just a quick reminder of that stat that I've mentioned several times. When buyers are asked what benefits are provided by real estate agents during the home purchase process, most respondents every year say help the buyer understand the process. So it makes sense for us to be deliberate about covering that by building it into our consultation, doing it on purpose. And that's where this flowchart came from. Now, I showed this last time just briefly, but I want to step through it with you today in a little bit more detail, and we also uploaded it into the handouts. So you're welcome to take it and steal it and make something better from it. That's where I got it. I stole it from somebody once upon a time and made my own version. So we call that R&D, which is rip off and duplicate. So feel free, please, to rip off and duplicate. But let me step through some of this with you. So what I'll do when meeting with the client for the first time is I'll thank them for giving me the chance to meet with them and ask for permission to go through this, explaining the process, answering their questions, and asking some questions to get to know them and see how I can best help them. That's the premise, and I'll ask for permission to do that, which is a powerful thing. Particularly if somebody called and they wanted you to come open a door for them, and you said, no, that's not how I roll, let's get together. Not in those words, but that's the point. You should be grateful that they've given you that chance, and I am when I get that chance, so I thank them for it. Asking them for permission to go through this lets them know that it kind of gives me the opportunity to take control of the process, which is what we're looking to do. So I'll say we're going to start with an interview or a consultation, which is what we're doing right now. And I have some questions to ask you, some follow-up questions to what we talked about on the phone, and see if I can answer any questions for you, and then talk about what the home buying process looks like, and then go out and find you a house. So the next thing that I'll do is I will talk about the loan pre-qualification. If I've talked to them on the phone and I know that they're getting a loan, we're going to go into detail here. If we're talking about a cash purchase, then instead of that, I'm going to talk about proof of funds. Both the loan pre-qualification conversation and the proof of fund conversation both speak directly to negotiating. They both affect the home search, and this is a great time to talk about how we help in the negotiating process, because that's a value that we bring to the table. So if we're talking about the loan, then we're going to talk about TRID, we're going to talk about the working with local lenders, we're going to talk about appraisals, we're going to talk about the pre-qual form and the LSU, and we're going to talk about the commitments that a buyer's making once they get an accepted offer in terms of loan application and proceeding with time of the essence and all the hoops that they have to jump through. So we're going to talk about all that. If it's proof of funds, we're going to talk about can we get that now, or when are we going to get that, and how we're going to attach that as an additional, from the additional clause addendum to the contract. Then we're going to talk about the home search process, finding the property. Now, this may be different for you. For me, what I like to do is start by getting people familiar with neighborhoods first. Because you know the guy who shows up with 82 homes that they want to look at? Well, if 72 of those are not in the right neighborhoods for them, let's not look at those. So I explained that what we want to do first is show, if they came and wanted to look at a specific place, we're going to say, yeah, we're going to take a look at that. I also want to go through some neighborhoods based on our conversation and see if we can find the right neighborhood for you. And then we're going to look at the homes for sale in those neighborhoods, which again is us taking control of the process by saying this is the order that we're going to go in. When we find the right home that you're interested in, I'm going to put together a market analysis for you. Now we know that sellers are familiar with the idea of a market analysis and a CMA, and hopefully all buyers are doing that because that's our job as well. But I like to kind of blow this up a little bit and let my clients know that what the seller is asking is one thing. I'm going to put together a report to help them figure out price and terms that are good for them. And based on that report, we're going to together put together an offer strategy, a negotiating strategy, and we're going to present the offer. I talk again here about the negotiating process of maybe an offer is rejected, maybe there's a counter offer, there could be multiple counter offers, and we'll have talked about that in advance. So here it's simply a matter of kind of executing on that strategy and making adjustments as we go. And I'm here to help you during that stage. And eventually we're going to find the right house and we're going to get an accepted offer. So here at this point we're talking about what an accepted offer means. That when they put out an offer, if it comes back accepted, it's a binding contract. And it's important that we talk about that before they write an offer. That it's not a 3-day right of rescission or anything like that. It's if you put out an offer, you get accepted, you have a contract. Now it's time to get to work. We open escrow and your inspection period starts. And here during the inspection period conversation, we got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to talk about home inspectors. I'm going to talk about the difference between a home inspection and a walkthrough. I'm going to talk about the buyer advisory. I'm going to talk about documents that they're going to receive and seller disclosure, like the SPDS and HOA disclosures if we don't have that already, and clue and commitment for title insurance, all that stuff, and describe for them in detail exactly how the inspection period works in words, in English. We're going to look at the contract, and I'm going to provide sample contracts, but we're going to talk about it in English to get an understanding. At the same time, while after escrow's open, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. We're going to talk about what escrow is, the fact that it's a neutral party who receives funds and carries out the terms of the contract as their escrow instructions. We're going to talk about title search, the prelim, what exceptions are and what exemptions are, what those mean, and we're going to talk about the recording of the deed and what that means to closing. So the way I like to have this conversation about closing is to say that we have a close of escrow date, which sometimes is a moving target, but no matter what that close of escrow date ends up being, the close of escrow is literally the second when the deed is recorded by the county recorder. Because we know you've been in the situation where somebody shows up bright and early on the morning of closing with their U-Haul and all their family members and their perishable stuff and their dogs and everything else ready to move in, and we may not record till that afternoon. So we want to have that conversation up front. And along with that, we talk about possession being a whole separate, I move it off to the side here as a separate event because we want to make it clear that you get keys, you move in after the close of escrow. So that's a real abbreviated version of how I use this chart. The great thing about taking time here to walk through this, besides just clarifying what to expect and in some cases alleviating anxiety from some buyers that they might feel at this stage, is it helps bring unanswered questions to the surface by having a conversation and listening. So this is just good customer service, and it goes a long way towards showing the value that we bring to the table. And by the way, while you're doing the inspection period and escrow discussion, bring out the critical date list. Callie uploaded this as well to the handouts so you can get it as an easy download to take a look at it. Just show your buyers what's going on behind the curtain. This is just page 1 of 3 of all these steps that we're going to be monitoring. And all these things that say buyer in bold, these are commitments they're making. To deposit earnest money, to submit a loan application, to run credit, to supply an LSU, to provide items of disapproval from the SPUDs and insurance claim history, and to go get homeowners insurance, and to verify square footage and all their inspections. So we want to talk about this up front, but then reassure that we will be there to help, and this is the type of documentation that we use to help keep them on track, and give them a copy. Somebody brought this up last month on the first part of the webinar about using the critical date list and giving the buyer a copy. Absolutely, it's a great tool. Okay, so the 3 tools that we covered were the intake sheet, the critical date list, and a home buying process flowchart. The last thing that I want to cover with you today is expectations. setting realistic expectations up front as a payoff down the line to save us from lots of stress and miscommunication and potentially blown deals. So the three areas that I want to hone in on are the market, the home search, and working together. Starting with the market. You ever have that buyer who is in the middle of a seller's market, low inventory, houses are selling like crazy, and they're looking at a house that just hit the market today and it already has multiple offers, and they're talking about prices from 2009. That's what I'm talking about when we say realistic market expectations, reality of today's market. Is it a buyer's market? Is it a seller's market? And what does that mean? And is it a buyer or seller's market in the specific segment of the market that they're looking at? You know, there's no national market. There's no Arizona market. And the Phoenix market is very different from the Bullhead City market. But within all of our markets, we have these different segments. Some are hot and some aren't. So that's part of setting expectations. Talking about financing and interest rates and how all of these things affect the negotiating position. The bottom line is that we need to know our numbers and we need to be able to explain what they mean, which is a great differentiator from other realtors if you get good at this. And it's a value add to your service as a buyer's agent. So I'm not just talking about, you know, what's the median price and that sort of thing. I'm talking about understanding supply and demand, absorption rates, days on market, inventory levels, and what those things mean, and how to explain them in a way that's meaningful and understandable. So the first expectation we want to deal with is expectations of the market. The next set is expectations relating to the home search. And there's some stuff here that we need to demystify and clarify and just bring up on the table up front. Talk about your role in finding them the right home, what you do, and how you'll work together to help them get that home at the best price and terms. And you know what? This is the right time to talk about tools that you know that they're going to be using without you, like Zillow and like driving around. You know, people still do that. They drive around and they look at signs and they go to open houses and they jump into new builds. So we want to talk about that stuff. And we want to talk about how the MLS works. Because a buyer has no reason to know how things work behind the scenes in our industry unless we talk about it. So avoiding those things can lead to blown deals. They can lead to loss of commissions. They can lead to, if you're having a buyer sign a buyer-broker agreement and they don't understand how the MLS works, it can get them in trouble with their contract and what it's going to cost them to close. So we need to have those conversations. And again, we're going to talk more on the buyer-broker agreement in part 3. But having these conversations up front will save us a lot of grief and it'll help make a better experience for our clients. I'm in a small town, okay, so I bump into that client that went to a new build without me, right, and they didn't know how it works and cut out. So I gave up carrying that weight years ago. I talk about it up front. And keep in mind that 1 in 4 buyers say what they want most from their agent is help negotiating price and terms. So since all of these things relate directly to negotiation, we want to talk about negotiating and our strategies from the start, including things like do's and don'ts when the seller or the listing agent is present when you're looking at homes. So think about all those things through the buyer's eyes that maybe we take for granted or we assume that they may know. Bring them to the table and get understanding before we start. So those are expectations relating to the home search. And then the last one I want to talk about is expectations in working together. The agent-client relationship we're going to tackle next time, and most of this stuff falls very nicely within agency disclosure. We're going to turn agency disclosure on its head in part 3. That whole agent-client relationship dynamic, that's all part of setting not only expectations, but as Callie said earlier, boundaries. So that's the part I want to talk about is the communication and availability part of working together. And this doesn't have to be super complicated, but again, you want to talk about it up front. All I do is I find out what is my client like in terms of communication, and I stick with it most of the time. So I don't care if it's email, phone, texting, Facebook Messenger, whatever it is, that's their preference, I'm good. I'm working for them. They are my client. If that makes them happy, cool. But I do say most of the time, because sometimes, particularly in negotiating, or maybe you have sensitive or bad news to deliver, it's better to get face-to-face or even voice-to-voice, but something more than typing words. So for example, I have a seller client that I'm working with, and we got an offer recently, and the lender that the buyer was using, I'm not a fan. And I'm not a fan of that lender because they've proven over and over and over again over a lot of years to not be entirely trustworthy, in my opinion. Now, talk to your broker, but in my mind, as the agent to my client, I owe them to talk about that because that could affect their ability to close, and it should be taken into consideration before they accept an offer. But at the same time, that's not something I want to be talking about in 140 characters or less. So we take that, we get on the phone, or we get in person and we deal with that, and that's exactly what I did. We don't want to mistake that preference of texting to cross the line into saying we can never talk to each other again. So just be careful of that part. And then as far as availability goes, that's another one of those business decisions, and you're going to decide when you are and when you're not available. I just recommend that you make that decision known early so you're setting the proper expectations. I care about you guys. I hope that you get at least 1, if not 2 full days off per week every week. You've got to have some time off. For me, it's Sunday. I simply don't work on Sunday. That doesn't work for everybody. I have another agent on my team. Her day is Thursday. So she doesn't work Thursday. I'm not going to see her Thursday. She's not going to see me Sunday. We schedule our days off, and it's not a problem. We make that clear to our clients. And I also don't answer the phone after 7. Unless it's one of my agents or it's an emergency, it's going to voicemail. And I know if it's one of my agents because it's caller ID, and I know if it's an emergency because they'll call back or they'll leave a message. It's not a big deal, but I let my clients know in advance what my availability is because I've been down that road where I haven't told them and then they get hurt feelings. So we talk about that up front, and the expectations are clear. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about when we say expectations and then also boundaries. So I hope that's helpful for you. Another thing that I know is going to be helpful for you, I don't want to let you down, is I have another homework assignment for you. Some of it is repeat. So I would like for you to continue to look at your process of working with buyers. And keep in mind that buyers tell us every year they want help with that process. By defining and crafting and sculpting and making a process that's your own, that speaks to the buyers that you want to work with, that's marketing. That separates you. That provides value. So define what is your process for working with buyers and what value do you bring to the table and how can you evidence that value every step of the way, starting at that first meeting with the buyer's consultation. I'd also like you to take a look at that idea of DNA, desires, needs, and ability, and ask, how are you going through qualifying your clients in a way that adds value to them? How are you showcasing what you bring to the table in the process, and how are you making sure that you're asking the right questions? So I would suggest that you create a buyer intake sheet. If you don't have one already, grab the sample, and just start crafting some of those open-ended questions that you feel will get you the information that you need to help better serve your clients. Writing it down on a sheet, whether you do it digitally, however you want to do it, but that act of writing it down is important. And I am like allergic to paper. I want nothing to do with paper. I'm all electronic all the time. But I have my buyer intake sheets within reach right now in my drawer, and I use them on paper all the time. So please make a buyer intake sheet for yourself and see how that works. And then the 2 reminders, all this designing of your process that you control, draw the line, don't step over into decision making, because when we start making decisions for our clients, our liability goes through the roof. And we don't want to do that, and it's not our role. And then finally, reminder, please stop meeting strangers in private places. So with that homework assignment, I'm going to turn it back over to Callie, and I'd be very happy to stay here as long as we need to answer questions.
So, Evan, we just have a couple of questions. So as far as the handouts, they should be available on your screen. You just need to download them onto your system. We have the buyer intake sheet, the critical date list, and the buyer process flowchart available. And they should be right there on your screen on the side under handouts. And you can just click on them and they'll open. They're all PDFs. And then I also sent out a link to everyone for the critical date list. We have it available on our website at aaronline.com. And if you go to the website, just type in critical date list at the top search bar, and it comes right up, and you can download it either as a PDF or as a Word doc if maybe you wanted to put your company logo on it or your name and contact information. So they are available there. On the screen, you see Evan's contact information. There's his phone number and his website. Evan, just a couple of questions about today that we were, as you were talking about. Can you delve into a little bit more about what happens when somebody calls you and they say, hey, can you meet us right away? And they really do want you to drop everything. Do you have something that you can share with today's listeners about overcoming that expectation, or a nice way to say, hey, why don't you meet me in the office instead?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give you a couple of tricks for it. And I may have mentioned this last time, but no matter what somebody asks when they call me, my response is always adding on, what was it about that house that caught your eye? So if somebody says they want to see, 1313 Mockingbird Lane, I'm going to say, sure, what was it about that house that caught your eye? And if they say, well, I'm standing right in front of it, what I'm trying to do is ask an open-ended question to start a conversation that's going to lead to me not dropping everything and meeting a stranger in front of a house. So the simple answer is I'm booked. I'm not, like right now I'm sitting here doing a webinar. When I get off the webinar, I have a listing appointment. When I get done with the listing appointment, I have to go pick up my daughter from school, and when I get done with that, it's family time. But none of those details matter. I'm simply booked. But I'm available this afternoon, actually between 2 and probably 3:30 I'm available, and I have some availability tomorrow morning. So if you're booked, you're booked. Now, what you need to do is use words when you're talking to a buyer that they don't say, well, forget it, I'm going to call the next guy who will drop everything and show up here. And that's where the conversation comes in. Why should I meet with you? Well, I can help you. If you're driving around, did you find any other places while you're driving around? Let me get all that information together so I can help you with those as well. My office is right down here, or there's a Starbucks down the street, or whatever it may be. And then ultimately, you need to decide as the buyer's agent, if you're pushed to the question, are you willing to drop everything and go meet the client? For me, the answer is almost always no. That's something that you have to answer. But I can tell you that I very rarely get pushed to that point and lose business over it.
Well, also, doesn't it come down to setting the expectation, like you were saying? If you drop everything and run out the door to meet them the first time, doesn't that kind of set the expectation for them that you're going to do that throughout the entire process?
Yeah, that's a great point. And usually relationships are reciprocal, which means you do something for me and I'll do something for you. And if the something that I'm doing for you is that's how we're starting off, me dropping everything, I don't like the tone of that relationship. But I don't want to be cavalier about it. I mean, it's nuanced. You have to be able to say those things in a way that are reasonable. And another thing that you can always do is if you have an office policy against it, you can go there too for safety reasons. So there's a lot of different ways. You just have to kind of work on that. Works for you.
Well, absolutely. Using your broker, it's our company policy, or my broker doesn't allow me to, I think is a safe way to go.
Yeah, I would keep that as a safety net. I mean, I don't think you need to go there, but if you're pushed to the point where you don't know what else to say, and there's nothing wrong with using that.
And then, folks, on your screen today, you'll see that Part 3 is coming up on April 20th. When you registered for today's webinar, Part 2, you're automatically registered for Part 3. It's one registration for both parts. So you'll be receiving like a reminder a few days before April 20th. And just a reminder, that Evan is available for your questions. His contact information was on the screen. If you need that again, let me know. Also, in April, our second webinar of the month is the riveting topic of understanding the NAR committee selection process. We had so many people reach out to us and ask about the 2017 process. It's open now, so Craig Sanford, who serves on the NAR Finance Committee, will be joining us, and we're going to talk about timelines and process and everything you need to do to get your application in. And then for all of our new agents, I mentioned this earlier, I just want to remind you that you are personally invited. All of our realtors are invited to join us in Prescott. Coming up in a couple of weeks, we have our annual spring convention. And Evan, do you want to add a couple spots here of why should somebody attend spring convention?
Oh, sure. I've gone to every one of them but one over the last, I think, 16 years, and it's totally changed how I do business. The relationships that I've made with people, the networking, all kinds of valuable information in the breakout sessions. There's awesome speakers this year. Nobu's there, Jeff Turner's there. We have Jonathan Smoke, the economist from Realtor.com, and we have a lot of fun too. So, man, if you do one trip as a business trip this year, it should be going to Prescott for the for the spring convention.
Absolutely, and I think he says it really well, that this is a great culmination of both learning, networking, and building your business. Everything for these 4 days is geared towards helping you build your business. Whether you need to meet somebody, that maybe who's been in the business for 20 years, you're looking for a mentor, or you want to have some fun, you want to see what's coming up in trends. This is a great time to do that. It's $179 for the package. Come out for 1 day for $79. I think you have like another week before registration closes. So if at all possible, we definitely encourage you to join us in Prescott on March 29th. For questions, Evan, back to this, what about using the buyer advisory during the initial consultation?
Oh, absolutely. The buyer advisory is such a great tool for us. What I love about it, you heard me use this phrase about plain English. I love that it takes all the lawyery contract words and turns it into paragraphs that anybody can understand. And yeah, you want to supply that up front as soon as possible. I like to give sample forms in addition to my marketing stuff and the buying process that I shared with you. Sample forms in the buyer advisory straight up, including the seller's property disclosure statement. When you're giving the buyer advisory, make sure that you're also giving it electronically, because it's filled with a whole bunch of links. And if you give them the PDF version, they can just click on those links. But great tool, and it's a thing of value to add up front and get some credit for it.
Excellent, thank you. And then, Evan, can you give us a sneak peek on what our members can expect for Part 3 coming up in April?
Sure. So since Part 1 was all about us as the realtor, Part 2 is all about the buyer. Part 3 is bringing those two pieces together, the realtor and the buyer. So what we're really going to focus on is what buyers say they want from us throughout the transaction, turning agency disclosure into something of value. In other words, instead of looking at it as a chore, we're going to look at agency disclosure as a way to get business and get loyalty. And we're going to talk about the buyer-broker agreement. So those are the three pieces.
Excellent. So we're going to be talking buyer-broker agreement, disclosure, and kind of like the song says, what do you want from me?
Right. On disclosure, make sure we're talking about agency disclosure. So the fiduciary duties, which as licensees and the Code of Ethics and Commissioner's rules, they all say we have to do this stuff. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of great stuff that we can get clients by doing that just a little bit differently than the norm. So that's how we're going to be looking at that part.
Excellent. Evan, thank you so much for joining us again today. As always, the information that you provide is just wonderful and usable and actionable. And this is definitely stuff that, if you were taking notes today, you could easily implement into your very next buyer consultation. Correct, Evan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know I went through a lot fast. Sincerely, anybody contact me anytime if there's anything I can help with or you missed anything. I'm happy to help out one-on-one too. Great.
And Evan, do you prefer to be contacted via email or phone?
Oh, either way. If you go to my website, it has all my contact information. That's my name, evanfuchs.com. But if you want to call me at 928-704-6700, that's my office line. I'm here now, standing by.
Well, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And just a reminder that today's webinar was recorded and will be available on our website probably within a few days at aaronline.com. Again, thank you for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you, Callie. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Evan.